other things won't, but other things we do have on consent. And some other things we say.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to the September 16th meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. I'd like to welcome you all and ask you all to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. At this point in our agenda, we allow time for members of the public to address the authority on any item that is not listed on our agenda for the evening. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to some item not listed on tonight's agenda? Seeing no one come forward, I have no speaker cards, so we will close the public comment period and go to the approval of the minutes. Okay. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the approval of the minutes, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? Oh, okay. Very good. Sorry about that, Denise. I heard a chorus on both sides. Next item on the agenda is the consent calendar. Is there anything anyone wishes to pull from the consent calendar for a separate vote?
Yes, Madam Chair, item 2.1.
All right. 2A1 is what you want to pull?
No, 2.1.
2.1. Okay, the new item. All right. Very good. Anything else we want for a separate vote? Okay. Karen, do you want to ask your question?
I don't have a question.
You just want a separate vote?
Yes, please.
All right. Do I have a motion?
I'll move the remaining items.
Second.
Okay, motion by Tatson, second by Abelson to move all items except 2.1 on the consent calendar. All in favor of that motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain. All right. Do I have a motion on item 2.1?
Madam Chair, I
Yes.
just want to register a no vote. Has no reflection on the incumbent. I just, as I've previously stated under closed session, feel that this is not the appropriate time to be taking this action. So I needed a separate vote, so it could be no.
Okay.
I'll move 2.1. I'll second it.
Okay, I have a motion by, a motion by Hudson, a second by Tatson. All in favor say aye. Aye. Oppose? Okay, one opposition with Commissioner Mitchoff. Any abstentions? All right, that passes. The next item on the agenda is item 3.0, our major discussion items. We have several items this evening. The first is the development of the transportation sales tax transportation expenditure plan. And I believe Ross is going to be covering this one, starting with the introduction of the opinion poll.
Yes, thank you, Chair Pierce. Ross Chittenden, Deputy Executive Director with the Authority, and I'll be covering the first three items in this series of items, and Hisham will cover the fourth item. Very brief introductory comments on item 3.1. This is an information-only item, and as we've discussed in the past, there are potentially some other measures that may be considered on or before the time we may go to the ballot if we choose to do that. Two that we've discussed previously here have been BART, and then there's been some discussion with our members from the county on the board that potentially the county may be want to have some additional discussion before the authority takes formal action to go to the board. So we've asked EMC Research to do some field work to look at some of these scenarios. A summarized version of these results were discussed at the Board of Supervisors meeting yesterday. Some of you maybe have seen some press about that. So with that, I'd just like to introduce Alex Evans of EMC. He'll provide additional background as part of his presentation. Do you want to stand or sit? Sit, it's okay. Want me to do
Thank you. Alex Evans, EMC Research. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And I was groaning because I can never get these things to work, not because I had to sit next to Ross. So. Oh, look at that. Great. So we're going to present a summary of the results here today, and there's much more than we'll be presenting here today, and we'll continue to work with staff to analyze those results and find the appropriate times to present it, if necessary, to the entire board. So the objectives of this study, we wanted to understand relative regional priorities, and by that I mean what are the priorities for the voters in this county. And we wanted to look at 4 different possible tax measures with the understanding that the most likely scenario that only one of them would go forward, not all of them or more than one at one time, so that only one of them would go forward at one time. We wanted to understand the potential effect of the BART measure being on the ballot at the same time with a extension or new Measure J or C. And we wanted to understand what would happen if voters learned more about that, what the impact might be of a campaign, so we can make kind of an informed decision, not just on where we're starting, but where we might end up. In addition to that, we wanted to understand tax sensitivity and understand how voters perceive the County Board of Supervisors and the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. The methodology we used to do this was an 800-interview likely voter survey of November 2016 voters, has a margin of error of plus or minus 3.5. But because, again, we only wanted to look at one measure at a time, instead of asking all of the voters about all of the measures, which is something they would never experience, we used a subsample methodology where we asked a subsample about one measure only. So each respondent only heard about one measure, and that allows us to compare across the 4 subsamples to see how they each do. The margin of error for the subsamples is about plus or minus 7. This is a really complicated chart. You don't really need to understand it, but we just wanted to show you kind of how this worked. So everyone was asked regional priorities. Everyone was first asked how they would vote on the BART measure, because we want to understand what effect the BART measure might have on the measure that either you or the county would put forward. So we asked everyone first vote on the BART measure, and then they would hear one of these measures. We then told them what they might hear in support of a measure, what they might hear in opposition to a measure, and then we asked them to vote after each of those pieces. One thing that's been discussed, and this was a little bit of this study, was, what does it mean to be on the ballot with other ballot measures? And so what we put together here is what was on the ballot in November of 2004 when CCTA went forward with Measure J and was successful. So, searching for that clean ballot, it's almost like looking for the Holy Grail. We think it's out there, but we haven't really been able to find it just yet. And the clean ballot is somewhat comparable. I don't want to over-push the religious analogy here. But so in 2004, there were all kinds of things on the ballot at the state. And locally, BART had a measure on the ballot as well, their Measure AA, which was successful at the same time. So if you want to do what you did last time when you were successful, actually being on the ballot with BART seemed to work that time. And there are also several local measures, including a measure for AC Transit, East Bay Regional Park District. You can see all the cities that also had measures on at the same time. So there was a lot on the ballot in 2004 when you went forward. We looked at, this is not the results from the survey, but we went back and looked at the 2004 election. The BART measure in the 3 counties overall got 69%. It needed 2/3, so it was successful. In Contra Costa County, it got 61%. The AC Transit measure, which was again on the ballot at the same time, was successful, got 73%. In Contra Costa County, it got 72%. And then, of course, your measure received 71% of the vote. So you ran about 10 points ahead of the BART measure. It's also important to note that for a BART measure to succeed in the 3 counties, generally speaking, the approach is get 2/3 of the vote in Alameda County, and then win in San Francisco by about as much as you lose in Contra Costa County. So that, and losing means getting 61% of the vote. So you get 61% of the vote in Contra Costa County, a BART measure can still be successful. That's a little bit of the groundwork here. So looking at who might be putting forward a ballot measure, we asked voters if they had a favorable or unfavorable opinion of these three organizations, BART, Contra Costa County Board of Supervisors, and the CCTA. As you can see, they all have net positive ratings, so more people have a favorable rating of them than an unfavorable rating. They're all in pretty good shape. BART has a very strong rating. It's 75% favorable to 22% unfavorable. This is from our most recent poll just done a couple weeks ago. The County Board of Supervisors has a 46% favorable to a 31% unfavorable, 1.5 to 1 positive to negative. CCTA is the least well-known of the organizations, but its rating is 2 to 1 favorable to unfavorable, 40% to 20%. So the County Board of Supervisors rating at 1.5 to 1 is a good rating, but if you're looking to get 2/3 vote for a measure, or conversely, if you only need 1/3 to vote no, starting off an election like that with almost 1/3 of the voters having an unfavorable opinion of you makes that more difficult. So from the position of going forward and sponsoring a 2/3 measure today, CCTA is in a modestly better position than the Board of Supervisors. When we asked people how they would vote on the BART bond measure, so this is language that we got from BART. It's the same language that they've been using in their own polling. We tested a $3 billion bond amount, which again is the amount that they've most talked about. They are still thinking about maybe being a little bit higher or maybe being a little bit lower, but we did discuss this with them and agreed that $3 billion was the right amount to test in this poll. And we found that 65% of the voters said that they would vote yes on that measure. 34% said they would vote no. So again, even though that in Contra Costa County alone might not be enough to pass the measure, in the three counties combined, they really only need to break 60. So in this county, at this time, they're receiving enough support to be successful in the three counties. Okay, so we asked about 4 different measures on the voters to try to help shed some light on, the various strengths and weaknesses of either the county doing a measure or CCTA doing a measure. For the county, we looked at 2 different measures. One would be a half-cent sales tax, where the money would go half to public safety and half to transportation. So essentially, you could hand them a TEP for 1/4 cent, and they would include that in their measure, and then they would have a comparable TEP, except it's not T, for public safety. The second measure we tested for them is a 1/4 cent, where it would only be for public safety. So it would essentially be preserving for CCTA 1/4 cent to use on transportation. They would use 1/4 cent on public safety. And then 2 additional measures we tested for CCTA. One is the half-cent measure that we have been testing all along. And then secondly, we tested the same thing at 1/4 cent. And the theory here is that if the county went forward with 1/4 cent for public safety, you would do your own 1/4 cent for transportation, not judging which one would go first. But again, only one of these measures is what you would go forward with. So looking at this a couple different ways, the first thing we did was we took the 2 county measures, the half-cent and the 1/4 cent, and we averaged them together. And we did the same for the CCTA measures. And you see that the average on the county measures is 67 to 32. The average for the CCTA measures is 71-27. It's close. It's within the margin of error, but the CCTA measure does do a bit better when we average the 2 together. When we look at a half-cent versus a half-cent for the county versus a half-cent for CCTA, we begin to see a little bit more of a gap. The CCTA measures at 72-27. The county half-cent is at 65-34. So that's +7 to CCTA on the positive side alone, and a +7 on the negative side. So now we're beginning to get kind of at the edge of the margin of error, and we continue to see a slight advantage to CCTA. Next, looking at a quarter cent versus a quarter cent, not as much of a difference, 69 for the county measure and 70% for the CCTA measure. So in this case, the county measure is public safety only. All right, so looking across all 4 of the measures, you see the one that does the best is the half-cent CCTA measure, the one we've been talking about the most here at the Transportation Authority at 72%. The half-cent county measure at 65% is the one that fares the poorest. Generally speaking, for a ballot measure, particularly a ballot measure involving taxes, you want to be ahead, and you assume you're going to lose some ground even under the best of circumstances in a campaign. So starting at 72, while it might not seem like a big difference than starting at 65, let me state the obvious, you're better off starting at 72 and having some room to lose than starting at 65 and having to grow. Next, and I won't go through all of the arguments we used in the simulation today, but we went through and told voters, just as we have previous polls for you alone, here are all the reasons you might vote for each of these measures. Again, each respondent only hearing one. Here are the reasons you might vote against these measures, and asking people to vote again at the end of that. And what we found was they do lose ground. The CCTA measures are a bit more resilient, and they have a little bit more room to drop. So they drop from 71 to 66, which puts you right at the border there to winning. And the county measures, while they start at 67, end at 63. Just a couple more things I want to point out. Looking just at the half-cent sales tax measure, in this poll we were at 72. Comparing it to the poll that we did for you in March and January of last year, you see the numbers are pretty consistent. The yes side has grown a hair there, again within the margin of error. The no vote you see has been pretty consistent at 26, 27, 29%. So since our last poll in March of 2014, there's essentially no change in support or opposition to a CCTA half-cent sales tax. Just a couple last slides here. Voters in the county are increasingly optimistic. 60% now say things are going in the right direction versus 23% saying things are seriously off on the wrong track. As you probably have experienced this in your own life, it's easier to ask people for money when they feel good. And we're seeing that voters in the county feeling better and better about how things are going in the county, which may make them more supportive of a tax measure. And then what we see in this poll here, and I think this is the first time in a long time we've seen this, traffic, transportation issues are now at the top of the list of the most important problem facing the county. So we asked this as an open end. What's the most important problem facing the county? You see water being number 2 at 12%, crime at 11%, education 8%, growth. So now transportation is number 1. So that, again, when thinking about going forward with a ballot measure, you're in a much better position if you don't first have to explain to people that there is a problem. So voters recognize that there is a problem and recognize that this is the most important problem. So I want to share the 2 conclusions I shared with the Board of Supervisors yesterday, and then just a couple other notes from what we saw in addition today. The first is that CCTA is in a modestly better position with voters to go forward with a ballot measure at this time, particularly on transportation. And then secondly, part of that conclusion is based on that 1/3 negative rating that we see for the county. So the County Board of Supervisors, overall, their rating is good, but that 31% negative is definitely a warning light when you think about going forward with a ballot measure. So key findings: transportation now a top concern for voters in Contra Costa County. Initial support for a half-cent sales tax put forward by CCTA exceeds the 2/3. Campaign simulation drops that right to 66%. So I know you know this, but I have to say it. This is not going to be easy. If you decide to go forward, you have to be prepared. Someone has to be prepared to put together a campaign to support that effort. Transportation sales tax measures receives moderately higher support than a county measure. And there is greater trust for CCTA to handle transportation issues than when compared to the county. And that's probably partly due to the fact that you have transportation in your name. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any additional questions.
Questions for Alex? Yeah, Newell.
Alex, great job. It's always interesting to hear you are so succinct in getting to the point. My mother used to, 37 years, was in the business of working for Lewis Harris Gallup Opinion Research, and that's where I learned math. And one of the things, and it wasn't what you did, but in some of our other polling, the way it came out weighted, it seemed to be that the people we contacted and through the process were more likely commuters who use public transportation. So it seemed to be skewed more towards that. In this sort of random 800, how many contacts did you make, and how many people, what percentage of those were actually willing to do the survey?
I don't have the response rate with me. I know that we didn't experience any unusual difficulty relative to all the other surveys that we do in gaining cooperation. We did look, the first thing we do is we look at the demographics of the respondents and compare it to likely voters using the voter rolls. And where necessary, we did make weighting adjustments so that it did reflect the demographics of the voters. So we're quite confident that this is a representative sample of November 2016 voters.
Okay, yeah, because the concern would be is that if, you know, again, people who commute are used to commute on public transportation, are used to engaging with how do I get there, what do I do, what's the next trend, and things like that. The person who puts the key in the car doesn't have to talk to anybody. They're less likely to want to do a survey unless. So I just wanted to make sure that that was accounted for so we're totally balanced. So we don't find that we had the 2.5% to 4% that are using public transportation weigh in, and we're close. So I appreciate your response. Thank you.
And I won't tell you exactly what I said, but we did in our staff meeting about this project say that this poll is going to get a lot of scrutiny, and I'm going to be standing up there talking about this, and I want to make sure I'm right. And they are absolutely confident that we have a representative sample.
For those who might be listening on their computers to us live streaming, there's clearly construction going on over our heads. That's the banging you hear. That's not us in the room. But we will try to put a stop to that and go forward. Don.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was very helpful. In the graph you presented that showed the results of different response to different types of taxes, what was the confidence interval for those results roughly?
Plus or minus 7.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Alex. This is very enlightening. We
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right, Ross, on to 3.2.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 3.2 is an action item to make some additional appointments to the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee. We've talked about that. You all know who they are. You do have a handout. We've identified an additional person since the time of the printing of the packet. So you have that with me, and to read it in the record, I'd like to be very clear here, Madam Chair, on our staff's recommendations. It's 2 things. We want to appoint the following individuals to the EPAC. Public Health member, primary member Rebecca Rosen, with an alternate Eliza Washington. Eliza Washington was the addition since the time of the printing of the packet. John Muir Trust, primary Linus Eichel. Transform alternate Jeffrey Johnson, as an alternate primary member Joel Ramos. And the Northern Waterfront Economic Development Initiative, an alternate Jamar Stamps, who I believe is here today, as an alternate to primary member Richard Seithel. The second part of staff's recommendation is that we close further appointments to the EPAC. We are getting some occasional interest in joining. We think the process is far enough. Coming in at this stage may take a lot of effort to get folks up to speed. So our recommendation is to appoint the members I've read and to close further appointments.
questions, comments?
I'd move to accept as presented for both items, both the appointments and to close future appointments.
Okay, it's a motion by Arnerich, a second by Anderson. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain. That carries unanimously by those present. Thank you very much. On to item 3.3.
Thank you, Ross Chittenden again. Item 3.3 is an informational item. As we've discussed in the past, staff will provide the authority of the minutes from the Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee meetings once they are approved by the membership of the committee. Your board packet has the approved minutes from the July 1 meeting, and we've included as a handout the approved minutes of the August 10th meeting, which were approved this past Monday. Just a general summary of those minutes. Both of those meetings were largely to provide EPAC with some background information, so there was a number of presentations by staff and others, and a beginning of a discussion on the priorities for investments and some of the policy considerations that we may want to undertake as part of a new measure. So I'd like to, I think it's more productive time here to talk a little bit about a summary of the meeting this past Monday and to inform you of what the next few agendas will look like and what you can expect to see from the EPAC members. I think this past Monday we really started to get some good dialogue from some of the members. We have frankly, I think we have a mix of folks who are interested in going through a deliberative process to come to results, and a number of folks that just want to dive in, roll up their sleeves, put the priorities issues on the table, and kind of work through it in a negotiation factor. I know we're not going fast enough for everybody, but we are starting to get these issues on the table. So I think the folks that want to dive in are starting to get their way. So I think that's very good progress. In a discussion this past Monday on vision, objectives, and some of the priorities, I see several themes emerging, and I wanted to share those with you. There's a big belief pretty much across the whole room that we need to recognize that we have an extreme housing shortage and that we need to find ways to increase housing production in the right location. So hang on to that. I think some of the other things I'll talk about will relate back to that. Martin made a very good presentation on the history and the current process for a growth management program. Certainly there's a consensus that the growth management program is a very good model. Some would call it a good start. Want to tweak it a little bit, both in some land use provisions and some of the other provisions that are in there. Several are saying we've gone far enough and are going to be resisting to any change. So I think this is going to be one of the biggest topics of discussion as we go through the process, and I don't think that's a surprise to anybody there. Certainly a lot of discussion on the concept of mobility management and making sure that we're serving all members of our population. This is being discussed relative to our aging population. We've seen the numbers on that. We want to ensure services for persons of all abilities, of physical, cognitive, et cetera, and we want to make sure that we're serving our youth. So big discussion on that, and Peter is attending all those meetings, and he's going to be getting a few additional action items. Peter, the EPAC wants to see some increased multi-jurisdictional cooperation. Again, I think that some of the growth management principles that we put in place, creating regional committees, action plans, et cetera, have taken us a long way and where we need to go. They want us to go a little farther, and that's both cross-jurisdictional boundaries as well as multimodal travel. They view that government boundaries and changing from one service provider to another should not result in disconnects of services. So I think we'll, again, see some discussion on that. And that particular topic, and I think relative to the growth management program and a few other items, are the housing. Big push that we use a significant amount of the funds available as incentive programs, that we want to use funds to, number one, we're investing in priority development areas. We're setting aside and investing in activities that create jobs, locate businesses in the right places, produce additional housing, inside and outside of priority development areas. So I wanted to make that distinction, that we're not just want to focus on priority development areas. We need to look at all suitable land. We want to incentivize the preservation of open space, protect agricultural lands. Lot of discussion about land use, and I know we've been very clear with them that we do not have and do not want land use authority. So that's where this concept of using the, depending on your half full or half empty view, a carrot or a stick to encourage certain behaviors. So that's we just started to scratch the surface on that, and we'll have a lot more discussion on that over the next couple of meetings. And then last point I'd say is that recognizing that this is on top of Measure J, we want to see a program that's very forward-thinking and has some flexibility in it to account for things that we don't know now. And the easiest example there is want to make sure that we can take advantage of some emerging technologies, some different ways to provide services. Again, kind of back to the mobility management discussion. I saw, certainly at EPAC there was this discussion, a little bit of this discussion yesterday at the Board of Supervisors. We don't know if there's going to be services that can provide equal or better services than some of the traditional services that we use throughout the county. That's just one example, but want to find a way to allow us to adapt. 25 years is a long time. Again, this is overlaying Measure J. So they're really encouraging us, and personal opinion, I think this is a good thing, that we want to be aspirational in our goals. The next couple of agenda items that we've outlined is we're going to continue talking about some of the results of the analysis for the countywide transportation plan options, and you'll hear more about that from Martin later on the agenda. We are going through some detailed analysis, and we'll be sharing the results of that with the EPAC folks over the next few meetings. This is intended to inform them on how different performance indicators, greenhouse gas reductions, vehicle mile travel, modal shift, things like that will react based on different investment decisions. We're going to be talking a lot about growth management program. We're going to have a conversation starting next meeting about advanced mitigation program. There's several programs around the state where if you can get the assurances of certain permitting agencies, you assemble more dollars, you get more results out of mitigation by doing it up front. But that does require that we get those assurances that once we mitigate, that we're not mitigating twice. So we'll have that discussion, as well. John Kopchak will be at the next meeting to talk a little bit about East County HCP and how that's accomplishes many of the same goals as advanced mitigation, and how it's complementary and what some of the differences are. And then we're going to spend a lot of time at the next meeting and then provide results at the following meeting to get input to help us put out one or two transportation expenditure plans. At the end of the day, we have to come up with a series of numbers that add up to 100% in different investments. So we want to get information and start providing back some scenarios. How we ultimately do that, whether it's in ranges or one version and hand everybody a box of darts and say start throwing darts at us and give us your feedback that way, that's fine. But we need to start getting that input. Maybe it's just because of the progress we made so far. Maybe it's really where the group is. There seems to be more interest in talking about some of the policy considerations than actually how the numbers divide into different programs. So I'm not sure if that's too early of an assessment or if that's an accurate assessment, but I think that's where the group is now. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about how we want to use the dollars. I guess I didn't mention the increased accountability with external oversight, and with some real teeth, and an ability for oversight committees to say yes and no to different things, and that's going out there. But increased accountability, increased transparency, and again, I think everybody recognizes and will acknowledge what we do now is good and it works well, but there's always room for improvement. So I don't think anything that I heard, and I don't know if any others in the room that attended the meeting saw criticisms. I think it was acknowledgement that we have good programs in place. Again, this is an opportunity that's going to come around unless you stay around for a long time, once or twice in a career, and we need to make some good decisions with this. So it's going to be an interesting process, and we will. The next two meetings are on September 28th and October 12th, so they will both occur before we get back together. So we'll be able to provide you much more information on where we are, because I think that's the bulk of the work is going to happen over the next three meetings. So I'll leave my report with that and entertain any questions you have about where the EPAC's going.
Any questions of Ross? Seeing none, thank you very much for the update. It's quite illuminating. Okay, on to 3.4. Hisham?
Good evening, Madam Chair and board members. My name is Hisham Raimi. I'll be spending the next couple minutes summarizing the input from. Excuse me. I'll be spending the next couple minutes summarizing the input we got from the 4 RTPCs related to the Transportation Expenditure Plan. Just for the benefit of the audience, the county is divided into 4 subregions. The 4 subregions are SWAT, which represents the San Ramon Valley and La Morinda, TransPac, which represents Central County, Transplan, which represents East County, and WICTAC, which represents West County. All the cities and the county sits on the boards of the RTPCs except for WestCat, where also the transit operators, the 3 transit operators, sit on their boards. With that out of the way, in response to the request that we issued to the RTPCs, the 4 RTPCs spent most of June and July and some of August coming up with their recommendations for a transportation expenditure plan. Each subregion was given a target, a funding target based on their share of 2030 population. And the underlying assumption here is that there will be a half-cent sales tax increase for 25 years, starting 2017 and ending 2042. Each RTPC was given information about the polling that we've done in the past couple of years, and also a list of Measure J projects that have funding shortfalls, and Measure J program expenditures by subregion, as well as their funding targets. This slide shows the funding target by each subregion. They add up to about $2.3 billion. And in front of you, there is a handout. It's the same as in your packet, just a larger copy, so you can see the numbers. This is our attempt to compile the input we got from the 4 subregions. There are 2 pages. One shows you the numbers in constant dollars, and the other shows you the percentage of each subregion share. The common things between the submittals were these projects, each subregion, all of these programs and projects were top priority. They were included in all the submittals, including local streets and roads, with the highest percentage, about 30%. The subregions wanted bus service improvements, including increased frequency to BART, transportation for seniors and people with disabilities was in all the submittals, as well as BART improvements, complete streets as part of major streets, ped bike improvements, including TLC, and student transportation. This pie chart summarizes the table you have in a different form. It's the same categories. The headings here are the same as the categories you have in your handout. And it shows you the share of each modes, basically. Let me just go quickly through some of the submittals by subregion. In Central County, the top priorities were major local streets, roads maintenance, and that's with 30% of the share, followed by improvements along congestion relief along 680, 242, and Highway 4. This includes funding for the 684 interchange and operational improvements on Highway 4 near 242. The other priorities includes doing complete streets on major streets, on major roads in Central County, as well as bus service improvements. In East County, the top priorities were, again, local streets and roads maintenance with 30%, followed by completion of State Route 239 from Brentwood to Tracy, and then E-BART extension to Brentwood. In West County, the top priorities, again, were local streets and roads maintenance, including sidewalk improvements, followed by improvements along I-80 at the interchanges, including 80 San Pablo Dam Road interchange, as well as improvements that are intended along I-80, the high-capacity transit improvements. And finally, in SWAT, SWAT basically came to a consensus on all the categories. The top priority was for local streets and road maintenance, followed by improvements along the 680 transit corridor. However, they did discuss two options for local streets and roads and BART improvements. One of the options was 30% for local streets and roads and 28 million for BART improvements. And the other option, that was one, and the other option was 50 million for BART improvements and lesser amount, 25% to local streets and roads maintenance. They did not make a final determination, and they recommended that the other RTPCs increase their share to BART improvements. So with that, I'll stop here. I just want to mention both TransPac and Transplan had unanimous agreement on their proposal. WICTAC, they had a 7-3 split vote, with the transit operators wanting more money to go to transit. And in SWAT, as I mentioned, they presented these two options on the local streets and BART.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to jump in just kind of related to the last item as well as this item. Just put a little more context of what we'll be asking of you over the next month or two. I think most of you have probably seen my crazy chart. They're showing the three main inputs that'll come up to this body. We're going through the EPAC and the members of EPAC as informing the board on the decision. I'm sorry, not EPAC. It's the RTPCs and the membership within the RTPCs informing you, and that's what Hisham just covered. In October, we're going to be asking the EPAC to provide a recommendation both on the expenditure plan and policies. And then we've ramped up again with direct public input. You got some of that a little earlier with Alex's presentation. Lindsay and her team are putting together some of the telephone town halls, and I'm sure you all received some of the emails about the Keep Cost of Moving online tool that we're using. So really want to just put that out here, that you'll be hearing more from all of these sources as you deliberate what you want your draft and ultimately your final TEP to look like. Relative to my last comment as well, with trying to get a starting point for some of the discussions with EPAC, we will be using the results of the RTPC input as we put that together as well. We want to make sure that priorities and that time spent gets into the process. The EPAC did receive a presentation from Hisham similar to what you had here today. He made the comment about WCTAC and some of the transit operators. So the transit operators and BART made separate presentations wanting to get their input independent of what came through the RTPC. So that's happened. And I'm sure that will probably happen here as well. I anticipate that ultimately you'll receive a presentation from PMA, Public Managers Association, to discuss the return to source component, because that's going to be, again, one of the largest items we're going to have to wrestle with. Can we get to the 30%? If we do, will it be my term untethered, or will there be some of these incentives I've talked about before and other accountability? We're going to have to deliberate on all of that. So again, I just wanted to put in context that you're getting a presentation on two of the three tracks that will be informing you as you make your decision. And well, actually all three. We had the polling, we had a little bit of EPAC and the RTPC. So you'll probably be getting a little bit of each of those over your next several meetings.
Okay, questions for Hisham or of Ross? Newell.
Maybe sort of question, comment. First of all, thank you. And Ross, you're doing an awesome job. It's also delightful, and we should give credit to the whole organization, and particularly Lindsay. Our poll numbers are coming up because people know what we're doing, because the one thing we found in the poll from a couple of years ago was we were doing a good job telling people what we're building, and a lot of other agencies were getting credit, so I think that's wonderful. Obviously, when you have, it's kind of like there's the parallel efforts going on here of groups who ultimately it comes down to us sitting here to make the final recommendation for expenditures. I just want to make sure that it's real clear to EPAC and to everybody that EPAC doesn't have all the say on this, and so I don't want any false expectations to say, gee, if they say it, that's ultimate. It's a delicate balancing act, and it's everybody has a different viewpoint. Cities have because of state revenues. To incentivize, what worries me is to hear somebody saying, well, you're going to incentivize getting return to source, trying to keep your roads paved, and you have cities like Arenda who have $80 million. That was $80 million. It's probably closer to $100 million shortfall, and they have an annual budget of $5 million a year. That's just to pave the roads. And the second thing I heard, I think we spent a lot of time, and the reason this agency is so successful is our growth measure was what sold this in the previous two elections. And the idea that we have a housing shortage, the answer is the total amount of land available and the development capacity within all of our general plans in the 19 cities in the county is more than sufficient for decades. That's just a fact. We've had an independent analysis of that from even our environmental groups, that it's important to understand that if somebody says, well, I'd like to start to modify that and move our urban limit line, it's because it's cheap. Let's be honest. It has nothing to do with supply and demand. It's cheaper to do that because I can buy it for a few thousand acre and make a boatload of money. And we just need to know that there are some fundamental things, and we weighed in on those things. So I hope that that there is some ground plane to this, that we're not going to go backwards on those, because if we do, it's going to be hard enough based on the numbers. It's 71% to make this pass. It's going to be a lot of work. If we were at 76, we might not be. So the point I'm making is I just hope that we're all, for all the groups, all the constituencies, that we recognize there's history. That history is valuable. there was no indication by this board to change that history. So there are some things that we should be willing to listen to any new idea, but to be frank, that we still owe it to the existing voters and those who have given money that we're spending today, and we still have another 20 years to spend, much less talk about a parallel. We can't have two sets of rules. That's just untenable. We wouldn't know how to make a decision. Staff won't know how to make a decision because that measure is unchangeable. So those rules and those boundaries are preset. So the new one has to be pretty aligned. So I just want to make sure that we're being honest about that. And if there's the tweaking to make it better, then we should listen to it. But I just, a caution, I guess, in that sense.
Yeah, just a quick response. Yeah, no one is talking about loosening the urban limit line. I haven't heard that one yet. Yeah, I think you said it much better than I. I think we're trying to get everyone to recognize that there's no fault here anywhere. We've got a great program in place, and if it makes sense to tweak a little bit for real improvements. There's a lot of folks on the committees, a lot of your communities. We're not going to change because somebody thinks it's a good idea to change. There's a lot of questions about if we make this change, what impact is that going to have? Can we guess at unintended consequences? So your point is right on, and we're trying to communicate that with the groups. And I think a lot of times people talk about, that doesn't work. Well, nobody, when you get down to it, everybody is really agreeing, and that's I was trying to communicate some of these themes is we've got a solid base, and we need to build on that.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you for the report. That's wonderful. There was no action needed on that. That was for information. We move now to our regular agenda items and to the legislative update, and I think we're going straight to Mark Watts on this one. Please tell us there's good news coming from Sacramento. The last few reports we've had have just been miserable.
Madam Chair and members, I'm happy to be here. I'm not sure it's good news. There's continued optimism that we will reach good news. I'll put it that way. I was asked by Lindsay to come just briefly bring you up to speed on where the special session is going, since it's been in place since the middle of June. And we've seen a lot of bills launched, and we've had a couple of hearings. What does it really mean that we have the special session, especially now that the legislature in regular session has adjourned and gone home? This is an unusual circumstance. I think the coalition, Fix Our Roads Coalition in Sacramento, League of Cities, CSAC, and others are principal supporters of that, coordinated a push to move into a conference committee structure for the ability to spend time during the fall with the conference committee taking up issues and items as under the umbrella of the special session. So there's no special trick to special session if you've watched these in the past. It's just a parliamentary maneuver to allow a different set of rules and structure to govern the movement of legislation. So it became apparent that the focus in the legislature the last 2 weeks before they went on regular session recess was on SB 350 and a few other bills, and it consumed all the oxygen in the room. So the idea was, let's keep talking, let's keep moving. Nobody was willing to say it's over with. I know it's been characterized that it's some sort of a setback for the governor. I don't read it that way. He was working on what he was working on, and now he'll be able to focus on this, as will legislative leadership. What we're waiting for right now is the appointees to be announced for the conference committees and some sort of guidelines as to what the two leaders of the two houses want, when they want to accomplish what they want to do within the special session itself. In other words, do they want to just get this thing going, have discussions, and wait until January when the legislature returns and then continue the special session and take up bills then? Or do we want to have conversations, discussions, and committee meetings during this interim period that lead to productive discussions where the two leaders could bring the two houses back in and vote on something? So that's we're at that precipice where we're going to learn next week, I think, membership and kind of the structure for moving forward. I've been in touch with the Speaker's office this morning. We may see, in conjunction with the special session, a few more of those roundtables, like that one that was conducted here at CCTA headquarters and in the East Bay. And so they're considering that, and we'll see how that turns out. Overall, just where the status of it is the Senate had 14 bills introduced thus far. They've conducted 2 sets of bill hearings. The principal bill in that Senate committee has been Senator Bell's SBX 1. It passed handily. It's sitting in special session appropriations. The Assembly Committee has not met other than to have an initial kind of formation committee meeting back in August. The second set of hearings I would just comment and observe is that were conducted by Senator Bell in the Senate special session, dealt with Republican reform bills, and I'll just take my hats off to him because he recognized the value of some of those bills, of potentially bringing Republican members along with the overall package, and conducted probably the most generously conducted hearings I've seen, most welcoming, taking foreign ideas, not so foreign ideas, and trying to move them along. Some of the more, some of the bills that were just not acceptable to Democrats were put aside, but there was a lot of focus on a couple of bills. 2 examples would be a modest CEQA reform, CTC independence bill was passed, and an Office of Inspector General bill was passed. So there are things that are moving along. And I think that's really pretty much an overview summary of the special session. Just note, things can happen at any time. On Friday of last week, didn't notice until Monday because the way the print schedule works, ABX 124 was introduced by Mr. Levine. And this would convert the empty seats into elected seats. So I'm not sure where this bill is going to go and how well it's going to be received in the legislature, but it's an interesting twist. I suspect it may have something to do with the Richmond Bridge, but I don't know enough about the history in that part of the Bay region. So that, in a nutshell, is what's going on in Sacramento. Like I said, we're poised either on the precipice or on the upward climb here to understand really what's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 months. And I'll be glad to take questions.
Questions for Mark? Nothing. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Keep us posted. We will try to stay optimistic. Thank you very much. Okay. The next item on the agenda is for our finance team, and that is to take up the item of authorizing the issuance of up to $190 million in aggregate principal sales tax revenue bonds. So, Randy, you want to give everybody an update?
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, Chair Pierce, members of the Authority Board. My name is Randy Carlton. I'm the CFO for the Authority. Yes, as summarized by Chair Pierce, we are now prepared to issue the next installment of the Measure J bonds. We're addressing a couple of objectives while doing so. One is we'll raise $100 million to keep the Measure J program of projects funded in accordance with the timing of projects that we plan for in our strategic plan. But the other thing that we'll be doing is we'll be taking out about $90 million of our previous debt that we issued in 2012 because we could do so today at a lower interest cost. Just that refinancing part of it will save the authority approximately $4 million over the next 10 years. So the savings there is substantial. That's money that we would otherwise be paying for bond interest costs that now will flow into the strategic plan and be used for projects. Debt financing is our tool that we use to accelerate projects. as a local government agency, we can issue tax-exempt bonds at very low rates. We can leverage our future revenue, and it enables us to award large contracts today instead of accumulating all that money over years and awarding those contracts in the future when the dollar is worth less. So all of what we've been able to do as an authority is largely because we've been able to raise money through bond sales and to get the projects going sooner than later. The proposed financing plan that is a part of the resolution that you're being asked to approve tonight calls for issuing conventional sales tax revenue bonds at a fixed rate. They're tax-exempt bonds. They'll be repaid over time all the way through 2034. They will have a callable feature to it, so that will give us some flexibility to take out the bonds within 10 years at no additional cost. There'll be no premium on that. The interest cost, we continue to be at historical low levels of interest rates. The total all-in cost, including fees and everything, 2.8% is what we're looking at. But the big news in terms of our financial plan is an outcome of a recent rating meeting with Fitch Bond Rating, where we made the pitch that the authority's bond rating should be upgraded. We're currently rated a AA+, but as of yesterday, we learned that our bond rating has been increased to AAA. That's an accomplishment for this organization that we're very proud of. We're now one of 3 transportation authorities in the state, ACTC and SANDAG being the other 2 that have this Fitch AAA rating, and it will save us money because of the higher rating, the lower risk, and the lower we'll be paying in the form of interest. The marketing plan that we have in mind includes investor outreach nationally, regionally, as well as locally. We have a banking syndicate of Citi, Wells Fargo, and Alamo Capital, which happens to be located in Walnut Creek. So all the necessary documents have been prepared. The transaction is staged and readied. We'll be looking to bring this to market the last week of September with a closing in the second week of October. So I would like to just say, bringing together financing like this is a very complicated set of tasks, and it takes a team to do so. And I'd just like to, if I can, acknowledge a few of the key participants in this effort. We have the finance staff, Brian Kelleher, and also the project staff that help us in estimating what their needs are. We have the executive director, our financial advisor, Peter Schellenberger, Daniel Ajise. We also have Mala and her firm, Best and Krieger, that represents us as the bond counsel. Our disclosure counsel wasn't able to be here tonight. It's with the firm of Hawkins, Delafoot, and Wood. Then there's a group of investment bankers led by Citigroup, and also includes Wells Fargo and Alamo Capital. The APC has been great to work with on this. We've been bringing them information along the way, and the board chair in particular has directly helped us by being a part of the group that approached the rating agencies a couple of weeks ago, so we're very grateful for that. So those are my prepared comments. Staff recommendation is that you approve Resolution 1546A. It will authorize this next installment of Measure J bonds, and we will return probably in October, November with the post-sale results. So I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Questions for Randy? Yes, Don.
Well, I didn't really have a question. I just wanted to echo his comments to thank staff for all the great work they've done. Not only do we have this item, the authority passed on the consent calendar a proposal to think a little differently and more creatively about how we refinance the floating rate notes in a way that will try and sell them to a bank, and that will result in some additional savings. So, I mean, all along, we've done a great job to take advantage of the low interest rate environment in which we're in. So at the appropriate time, I'd be happy to move the approval of the resolution.
I'd second it, since you just moved it.
Motion by Tatson, second by Arnridge. Is there any further discussion? I would just echo, fabulous work by staff, our finance team, everybody was wonderful. They made it a piece of cake to go in and talk to the rating agencies and make our pitch for how wonderful we are. So, yeah, AAA is really awesome. So I know that's been one of our executive director's goals since he got here, and he was more than a little bit excited when he relayed that news. So good job, everybody. So with that, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain. That carries unanimously. Thank you all very, very much. We're looking forward to going and selling these things and getting great rates and saving us lots of money. So that'll be terrific. All right, on to item 4B 11, and that is the project list for the RTP. Hisham, you're up again.
Good evening again. In response to that 2017 RTP call for projects issued by MTC on April 29, we worked with the regional transportation planning committees over the past 3 months to develop a comprehensive list of projects to include in the RTP. Just as a background, MTC updates the RTP every 4 years, and the 2017 RTP will cover the period between 2017 and 2040. It is a financially constrained document. That means the cost of all the projects and programs cannot exceed the amount of funding expected during that period. Projects must be included in the RTP before they can compete for state and federal funds. There are 2 ways they can be included in the RTP, either individually listed or be part of a programmatic category. Projects that affect the capacity of the transportation system and air quality must be individually listed in the RTP. Programmatic categories are used for projects that do not impact the capacity of the transportation system, such as pavement rehab, safety projects, and ped bike enhancement projects. In the handout, this is again the same as what you have in your package, just larger font. There are 3 lists, committed, financially constrained, and vision. Just quickly, projects on the committed list are either expected to be locally funded or are fully funded with a mix of state and federal dollars and have environmental clearance. Projects on the financially constrained list represent Contra Costa's top priority for funding in the RTP, and they are constrained by the amount of funding expected from discretionary sources over the RTP period. MTC has not yet told us what that amount is, but we have constrained it to what was in the last RTP, which is about $2.3 billion. The vision list is a backup list of projects in case MTC indicates our share is more than that $2.3 billion. If that happens, this is the list we pick from. Otherwise, the vision list will not be part of the RTP. We have a total of 211 projects and programs with a cost of $15.3 billion in year of expenditure dollars. The funding requests totaled $8.1 billion. Of those, 45 are on the committed list with a cost of $2.4 billion. 88 are on the financially constrained list with a cost of $7.1 billion, and 78 projects on the vision list with a cost of $5.8 billion. In addition, we have 5 BART region-wide projects that were also submitted with a cost of about $9.7 billion. The RTP process is just beginning, so we will be working with the MTC over the next year to ensure our top priorities are included. At this time, we are working with the sponsors to enter these projects into MTC RTP database so they can be modeled and evaluated by MTC staff. MTC plans to adopt the RTP in May 2017. At this time, we are just seeking your comments on the proposed lists. We will be asking you in October to approve Resolution 1549G, and forward the list to MTC. The TCC and the Planning Committee have reviewed the list and recommended approval. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Wow. We're an agreeable group tonight. All right. So the recommendation is to forward this on to MTC. No, October, sorry. Skip that end of it with the bifocals here. Okay, very good. So we'll see it again next month. Thank you, Hisham. All right, on to item 4B12. And this is a different list and discussion, and this is talking about investment options for analysis in the updated draft of the 2014 Countywide Transportation Plan Report and the SEIR. Martin.
Good evening, Madam Chair, and good evening, board members. Martin Engelman, Deputy Executive Director for Planning at the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. And this item is focused primarily on the 2014 Countywide Transportation Plan recirculated draft subsequent environmental impact report. As you recall, we issued a draft on the 2014 CTP back in August a year ago, and about this time a year ago we also issued a draft supplemental environmental impact report on the CTP. And last March, we changed course a little bit and you decided to pursue or look into the possibility of a transportation expenditure plan. And we aligned then the 2014 CTP process with the schedule for the transportation expenditure plan. So at this point, you are expected to release a draft transportation expenditure plan in November and a final draft transportation expenditure plan in January of 2016. And at that same time, January 2016, that's when we also expect to release the second draft of the 2014 CTP and another draft, a new draft of the SEIR. This time we're going to call it a subsequent EIR instead of a supplemental EIR, and I can explain that later. But to proceed with all this work and to evaluate the environmental impacts of the proposed countywide plan, at this time we need to define the alternatives that will be evaluated in the SEIR. And we've been working on that over the summer, and last Monday at the EPAC meeting, we daylighted a few of the alternatives. We also talked about these alternatives kind of at the sketch level in a notice of preparation for the SEIR, which we released at the end of last July. So the notice of preparation is out there. Comments were due on September 1st. In your packet, there were 7 comment letters, and since then we've received 3 additional letters. So you have a handout now that lists all of the letters. The first 7 comment letters on the NOP are in your packet, and the last 3 letters are at the dais as a handout. So we are required under CEQA to take those comments under consideration, and we don't have to write response letters to them per se. It's not required under CEQA guidelines, but we do have to show in January when we release the draft SEIR that we have addressed these comments somehow in the draft environmental document. So on the wall, we have a set of 4 maps, and they probably are not that easy to read from where you're sitting, but they show you the projects and programs that are expected to be included in each of these scenarios. And the top map is the roadway and HOV projects, and the lower map are all of the transit and bicycle and ped projects. So starting from the left, that is essentially the 2013 RTP, the adopted regional transportation plan. It includes the sustainable community strategy. And you can see there are brown boxes on the top and the bottom indicating there's kind of a balance of roadway and transit projects in the RTP. And this represents $3.4 billion in projects that MTC is expecting to have constructed and implemented by the year 2040. We are proposing to use that as our baseline. So in all of the alternatives in the EIR, we're proposing to use the adopted 2013 RTP as a baseline. It's got $3.4 billion in projects. We then have to decide, what does this proposed EIR evaluate in terms of alternatives. And we've come up with 3 transportation investment options. The first one is called the community focus, and it is primarily focused on connecting communities to good transit service. It looks at emphasizing capital investments in transit, and you'll notice on the upper map, the second one from the left, the top map is showing roadway and HOV projects. There are not a lot of roadway and HOV projects on the top map, but on the bottom map there's a lot of transit investment projects. The next alternative, alternative B, is the economic focus, and it is focused on improving the economy and providing good mobility. It includes a significant number of highway and HOV projects and improvements. It includes connecting our county to the county to the east, San Joaquin County and Alameda, through development of the TriLink project. It has kind of a balanced approach of roadways and transit. And option B essentially reflects what we heard from the regional transportation planning committees. Transportation investment option C is called the environmental focus, and it is steering away from capital investments in roadways and transit and focusing much more on programs for improved bus service, programs for improving access to priority development areas. There are a couple of new programs in there, including an advanced mitigation program and a program that would look at reducing displacement of low-income housing from priority development areas. So that's the program focus. And as we did this, one of the issues we ran into was, what do we use as a fund estimate? And I think the last time we talked to you, we said we would take the $3.4 billion from the RTP, and then we have $2.3 in new funds from a potential measure, and we said let's use the historic leveraging rate of about 1-to-1, which is what we've seen historically for measure C and J. I think we've achieved about 1.2-to-1. Well, that leveraging rate was achieved by getting a very high leverage on projects. We could get a 3-to-1 leverage on projects, but leveraging on programs is much more difficult to measure, and we assumed a 0-to-1 on programs. And the issue there was that these two alternatives to the left, option A and B, were coming in at $8 or more billion. I think option B was coming in at $9 billion because it had a lot of projects, and so it leveraged a lot of projects. Whereas option C, which is purely programs, that didn't leverage at all, and the total came out to $5.7 billion. Well, we want to have 3 alternatives that have equal levels of investment. And so to get to that point, what we said is for projects and for programs, we're going to have a 2-to-1 leveraging assumption. So that assumes that for projects, rather than 3-to-1, we've toned it down a little to 2-to-1. And for programs, rather than saying 0-to-1 or 1-to-1, we're going to assume 2-to-1 leveraging on programs as well. And we think that's a very reasonable assumption at this point in time, because in the future we're expecting significant more emphasis on programs and a lot more competitive programs. For example, cap and trade and active transportation programs, all of those are coming around, and if we can put Measure J funding on the table, we expect to be able to leverage it. So when we leverage it 2-to-1, that means that we have $6.9 billion in new measure funds leveraged plus the 3.4, and it comes in at a new number, 10.4 or $10.3 billion for the total program and project budget. So each of these A, B, and C represent a $10.3 billion investment in projects and programs. You'll notice in the letters that we received on the notice of preparation that there is some criticism about our continuing to do an SEIR instead of a full EIR. And we've looked into that and talked to our environmental consultant. And according to our environmental consultant, the cost of changing this from a supplemental environmental impact report to a full environmental impact report is fairly minor. We have a $300,000 budget for the SEIR, and our consultant thinks that for about a 10% increase, $30,000 additional dollars, we could go to a full EIR. We would still be tiering from the 2009 CTP. We would still be tiering from the 2013 RTP. The title of the document would change from SEIR to EIR. It's something you might want to consider doing. And the other letters in here, if you look at the letter from the Greenbelt Alliance and also from Save Mount Diablo, they are talking about certain projects that they like and don't like, and we've tried to reflect their comments in our selection of these three alternatives. So if there are projects in one and not in the other, that's because we're trying to come up with an investment option that kind of suits the different tastes, and everybody's got a different view of where we should invest our dollars. But the main point is that all of the projects that we expect to be considering in the next few months for inclusion in a transportation expenditure plan are addressed in these three options, A, B, and C. So I hope I've covered everything, and if not, we might be able to do it during Q&A, but that concludes my report.
Okay, questions? Bob?
Tom first.
Oh, okay, Tom?
Well, I went through all these letters, starting with the one from the Greenbelt Alliance, and there was public advocates and Save Mount Diablo, Sierra Club, and so forth. And there was a lot of content in there and a lot of detail. And I know you kind of skimmed over it, but maybe you could kind of hit that again and tell us, are there any areas of significant contention in here where they've asked for something and you just said no, or you haven't responded to it at all? Or I mean, there's an awful lot of detail in here, and some of it's pretty complex.
Well, you'll notice in the TransDef letter, TransDef is challenging our use of an SEIR and claiming that there have been enough changes in the regulatory environment that we really should do a full EIR. As I mentioned, the letter from Save Mount Diablo asked that we explicitly exclude certain projects, as does the Greenbelt Alliance. There was a call from public advocates that we look at a climate and equity scenario, or I think they call it equity and climate scenario. And option C follows that very closely, so the percentages of the programs that public advocates is requesting and the Sierra Club has echoed in their letter, which is actually in 5.1, not on the NOP, but follows this item. We follow that very closely in investment option C. Public advocates also asked that we do essentially a Measure J alternative, but we're not really sure how we would do that. So we haven't been able to follow that, where that goes, because though we have followed the historical mix of projects and programs, I think, in Measure J under option B, but we can't really do Measure J over again, per se. And we're not required to address every single comment here or change our EIR in response to every single comment, but we will have to show when the EIR is issued, or SEIR is issued, that we have considered them somewhere in the EIR.
Okay.
Bob?
Well, I'm going to go two routes here. First of all, the difference between an EIR and an SEIR, what the hell's the difference? And then if it's, to me, an EIR would have more significant impact than an SEIR, by the way I understand it. So $30,000, is that a lot of difference in savings when you're speaking of this element?
Well, the way I describe the difference between an SEIR and an EIR is more of a standalone document, and it's evaluating everything in more of a new context, whereas the SEIR builds upon other documents, the 2009 CTP in this case, and the 2013 RTP. So I think EIR, we're looking at things more under a new light. It's 2015, and a lot of things have happened with greenhouse gas legislation, so it would be a stronger document. The impacts won't change. The environmental impacts of these projects and programs won't change whether you do an SEIR or an EIR. Same impacts, but just a different way of approaching it, and doing some fresh work, more fresh work for the EIR than you would for the SEIR. But as I said, yeah, it's only a 10% increase in cost.
I think I understood. Who makes that decision? Us?
Well,
Whether we want to.
you could make that decision tonight if you'd like, and direct staff to explore it further, and we would have to come back to you in October. It would involve a contract amendment with Lamphere Gregory to add the $30,000, but we'd bring that back to you in October for your consideration if you want us to go in that direction.
What's the additional time required?
There's no effect on the schedule.
Okay, and I guess the next issue I have, obviously I'm, well, you don't might not know it, but I'm chair of Transplant. And for the item C, no projects listed, well, that would really, we have projects listed and that are actually on board, and that it could have huge impact on Transplant. And I'm not sure Transplant's going to go along with, that's a part of East County that would probably be very objective to that. And then I also have, Kevin, you're on the board with me. Mm-hmm. You might want to make a comment on that also. Oh, okay.
Thanks, Bob. Next up is Kevin, and then Newell.
Okay. To follow up, I have concerns with all of option C. It seems that we are abandoning our role as a transportation planner and enabler and becoming a program manager with that option. where we've abandoned road construction and building roads, and here we're just going to manage programs and whatnot. Following up on Bob, there are lots of programs and lots of projects that are necessary for all of East County, and I'm sure for everyone else, that I would hate to abandon at this time. And I wouldn't look forward to eliminating any of them per se in any of the documents that we have. I think it's a bad thing to do right now. And following up on a comment that Newell made a couple of items ago, where he stated that, whatever we do coming out in this one has to be somewhat similar to what we've already done. And option C, in my opinion, would drastically change what it is we're going forward doing as opposed to what we've already committed to doing, and would make it difficult to manage from here on out in that process. And so I would, if option C had to be there, I would take out a number of items out of there to make it a little more palatable to move forward. But I'm not really, like I said, I have a lot of concerns with option C.
Martin, would you clarify, before I go ahead and go to Newell, would you clarify, please, the intent of the three different options? My understanding was that over the three options, every project that any of us have thrown out there is going to be covered in one way or another, so that when we come to a final transportation expenditure plan, we're going to be balancing it in the way that we feel is appropriate. It won't be A or B or C wholesale. It will be some blend, therefore, is my understanding. Is that correct?
That's correct, Madam Chair. There is going to be an option D in the draft SEIR or EIR that will be your draft transportation expenditure plan, and we will evaluate that. And that may include, some from menu A, some from menu B, and some from menu C. We don't know what's in or out of that yet, but the objective of the EIR is really to look at fairly dramatically different things, and to see what happens with regard to the environment and air quality and greenhouse gas emissions when we invest all of our dollars in transit capital, when we invest all of our dollars in transit programs, or when you have a balanced mix of roadways and transit. So we're going to, in a very unbiased way, evaluate these in the environmental document and give you results on impacts, and but you in the end will decide what goes into your draft transportation expenditure plan in January, in November and January, and this will all line up eventually in May to a final environmental document that clears both the countywide plan and your proposed transportation investment option, whatever it may be. So when we say a certain project or many projects are not in option C, they're still on the table and they're still evaluated in full. So we're trying to see some differences here, and if we make them all the same, when we come out, you won't be able to tell the difference, and it'll be difficult to select an environmentally superior option or to somehow inform your decision. We want this to help you make your decision in May, and so to show the different impacts.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Are you done?
Just to follow up on
Okay.
that, I would still, with that in mind, I'd still be adverse to eliminating any particular project in any of the options in that respect. Identifying any particular one, there's only one that is identified.
So you're asking that the note be stricken?
Yes.
Okay. Newell?
Thanks for asking that, Kevin and Bob. The question I want to ask is maybe to Mala, our legal counsel, and maybe, hopefully, at your background, you could do this. The concern I have is changing course after having a subsequent EIR, the SEIR, and changing to an EIR. I mean, there are some attorneys who would say, you know what, start over. It may could trigger, I don't mean the body of knowledge and the research, it could restart some recirculating that people look at it differently. It is what we were doing, as you said, that we have a EIR that was originally done to support this, periodically go through a subsequent EIR because it looks back each time. And the concern that I have from both a legal perspective, setting a precedent, are we opening ourselves up to some other ways that people can comment and effectively change what we're doing, because a new EIR replaces the old one. The subsequent is allowed to rely upon the previous one. So, Malas, could you weigh in and say, you know what, my recommendation is?
Yes, I can. I would recommend that you continue on with the SEIR, which is how we are proceeding, and not change course.
Great, because that was my inclination. And reading, since we have a lot of lawyers that are writing those letters there, the wordsmithing and all of that subtlety. So I would my recommendation is Mala's recommendation is let's take it off the table, stick with a subsequent EIR. I agree that we ought to have the ability and the idea we have to have options. We're supposed to, because otherwise we're not doing the environmental analysis appropriately. But it does give us the ability to make sure that all the projects are included in enough ways that when we draw upon our final expenditure plan, it correlates, yes, you can do it because it was analyzed and we fully understand the impacts of that. So, Martin, I would just echo, if there's a way that we need to make sure that those projects are balanced through all those analyses of A through D, then we should scrutinize that enough to make sure it does give us the maximum amount of flexibility and the maximum amount of analysis to support the decision that we'll make.
Okay, back to Bob quickly, and then on to Don and Dave.
Okay. I guess I got a little confused. That's very easy for me. We're going to have A, B, C, and D.
No.
And
That's correct.
And the reason how come we don't have D tonight? Because we don't know what A, B, and C are going to do? Because
We haven't chosen D yet.
we
we have to put
we
it
don't even
together.
know what D is going to be,
No.
correct?
D will be published if you keep on going down this course of pursuing a TEP. D would be issued in November, and we have set up the consulting group and their schedule so that they can turn the crank on all of these first in the next couple of months, and then they're going to allot time to do a very rapid work over the holidays on D, which you release in November, and we included in the draft in January.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, Don and then Dave.
So in subsequent discussions of this, are we going to hear the words community focus, economic focus, and environmental focus many more times?
Only if you wish to.
Well, and I guess that sort of brings me to my comment. My concern about that is labels are important, or can be important. And I wouldn't want people to view our decision that the authority decided to promote the economy instead of the environment, or promote the environment instead of the economy, as one example. And so what I would suggest, I'm not suggesting we change what's in the alternatives, but maybe we talk about them as three different ways to accomplish our mission, which encompasses both a healthy environment and a strong economy.
And that's our item D.
Okay.
When we
Well,
get
that
to it.
becomes right.
That's probably what our focus will be
Well,
when we get to our
And that's
ideal.
fine, but I guess I'm just worried that the labels can have implications that we don't intend at this point. So maybe A, B, and C is
Just
better.
leave them A, B, C. Don't put an adjective or a noun or
I
anything.
believe that's what the ad hoc committee mentioned. Okay, that said, Dave?
Yeah, everything everybody just said. Now, I think it's important that we chime in about the SEIR or a whole new EIR. I'm for staying with the SEIR. I do believe that when you analyze, you do need to have different focuses, and that's what really is here. You're looking at three different focuses. I always defer to Don's calling it A. He can come up with something better than A, B, and C. But when you're getting into the more of the outreach part of it. But I think for right now, and the direction of staff is, yes, you have 3 different focuses that need to be analyzed so that as Steele from Newell, that you take from each one and you get to see how does this work with what we promised the people previously in J. Because I don't see any of us voting against something. We're not going to stop Highway 4. We're not going to stop Caldecott. It's a little late for that. But I mean, it's along those lines that we all feel the commitment and we'll honor it.
Okay, any other comments from the board members? I would just echo the comments, particularly from our members from East County, and having gone through a lot of those discussions with our East County colleagues about what's involved, particularly with the project that is specifically called out to be excluded when none of the others that were complained about have been excluded from any of the alternatives. I think that's wrong. I think it's only fair that we don't exclude projects from any of them, and we fairly evaluate all of the projects that might potentially go forward under any of the scenarios. If all of them had been called out, that might be something, but every region would be screaming if that was the case. And right now, I think it's very disrespectful for our member agency in Pittsburgh particularly to have their items singled out to be excluded. Even if it winds up being locally funded at some time in the future, it shouldn't have a taint on it by being called out as something that's for some reason got a bad name or something. So I would ask that when we adopt or recommend this measure, that we ask that the note under option C be deleted. So you are looking for a motion this evening, I believe? Or a recommendation?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay. Well, I'm hearing that they want a recommendation. It's not like we're going to revisit this and do something different.
Let me just tell you the implications of your recommendation.
Okay.
So to come up with a draft environmental document in January, to publish it, we have to start the modeling, turning the crank on all the modeling and evaluation
so we're recommending this
tomorrow.
approach.
And so we want you to be aware of the 3 investment options that we have suggested here. We want you to be aware of the leveraging assumptions, which gets us to this $10.3 billion. And we want your input on any of these if you think we're not going down the right path. But once you approve these with whatever modifications you wish to make, we are going to get to work. And that work will be done in good faith, and you can't go back in November and say, oh, we want to change option A.
Okay.
If you change option A in November, we can't deliver a draft environmental document in January. So this is kind of a commitment to these 3 investment options with whatever comments or edits you'd like to make.
Okay.
And we will proceed on that basis and start.
So a motion
spending
to
consultant
approve
funds.
these 3 options as they may be amended going forward is the appropriate action.
And also option,
Is that correct?
in option D, and that we would continue with an SEIR,
Yes.
and that we
Okay.
would drop the
Who
note.
wants to make the motion and be specific?
I'd make I'd go ahead. I'd be glad to make the motion that we recommend that we continue on with an SEIR, as suggested by our legal counsel, that the 3 options include the option D, as Martin has described, that we delete the reference that Julie said to the note on option C, and make sure that we're including the maximum number of projects in these alternatives.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Arnrich, second by Taylor. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you. And it included no names, right?
No
You're-
names.
I didn't hear that, but
No names.
direction to staff is A, B, and C. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. We are on to correspondence and communications. There are lots of letters in your packet. Associated committee reports are also included in your packet. We are on to commissioner and staff comments. Any commissioner comments? Yes, Don.
Just very, very briefly. Members Anderson, Glover, Butt, and I are also members of LAFCO, and LAFCO is starting to look at developing an agricultural and open space policy. At our last meeting where we discussed this, we agreed that we would reach out and solicit inputs from the Transportation Authority, from the public managers, from the Special Districts Association, et cetera, and anybody else who wants to comment. And so we're going to start that process, hopefully by being on the Planning Committee's agenda in October. And in turn, Martin is going to come and present CCTA's growth management plan to LAFCO at our October meeting.
Cool. Very good. I'm sorry. Bill?
I just wanted to raise something that some of us have talked privately, that to make sure that the whole board is aware that of the proposed action by MTC to take to withdraw all of its funding from ABAG for the planning function, with the ultimate goal to take over all the planning functions. It is a staff request that is being pressured onto the MTC board. The MTC board seems to be leaning that way. It will have a dramatic impact to the point that ABAG could cease of the magnitude. Our arena numbers, the things that we all look at in all of our jurisdictions that affect us in transportation, planning, growth management, everything originates with ABAG. This is quietly moving. It's now our
Actually,
PMA.
they don't want the RENA numbers. They want ABAG to still do that without planners.
Right, without planners. Thank you. The PMA in Contra Costa County is sort of forming a lead group to stand up. There is a executive board meeting of MTC that's coming up tomorrow.
No, the ABAG is tomorrow
ABAG.
night. MTC is next Wednesday.
Thank you. It's rapidly moving, and I'm just saying we all need to talk to our own staff about this, weigh in, and talk to our representatives on there. And I know we're going to be short our representatives from Contra Costa County because Amy's going to be out of the country when this is going to be voted on.
No, it's not going to be voted on in September. The vote will actually take place in October, but the discussion will happen at the September 23rd meeting of MTC, and that's where we really need some heavy-duty discussion.
Right. So we should all, my point is it's going to impact this agency in a variety of ways. It's a strong power play for MTC to take overall planning in the Bay Area. It's going to affect land use planning. It's pretty significant, and each of us will have a different view of it. I'm just suggesting we jump in now, and it's not something we can wait for.
Thank you.
What was the organization you said was forming in Contra Costa to?
The Public Managers Association had a meeting specifically on this
okay.
last week. First time they became aware of it, and all of our city managers are keenly interested in that. They all seem to be headed of trying to keep the planning function with ABAG.
Okay. Yes, Karen.
Well, and along that line, Supervisor Glover does plan on attending that, so you may wish to share your concerns with him. I've shared, both Candace and I sit on ABAG and we'll be there tomorrow night, but MTC has this quirky rule that you can't have an alternate. And so Federal is supposed to be there next Wednesday. As I mentioned, I've talked to him this past Friday about the concerns we all have, but it wouldn't hurt to share your thoughts with him so he has that perspective as he attends that meeting.
Well, and frankly, as he goes to vote on, or any other member who is voting. So, Okay, any other commissioner comments? All righty. I have no particular report other than a Yahoo for AAA rating. That's just so exciting, I can hardly stand it. So, executive staff comments. Randy, you haven't said anything all night.
I'm a very quiet person.
Yeah, right.
Thanks, Chair Pierce and Commissioners. This has been a very quiet August. It's probably been actually the busiest August we've had, at least in the 5.5 years I've been here. We've worked just long and hard. Ross has, I think, been to every nook and cranny in the county, every meeting that's ongoing. Joel and I have been to a meeting together in Antioch, and then I thought I was finished after that long meeting. And they said, hey, Iwasaki and Director Keller need to make this a team. So we've been going around to various cities now and talking about BART and CCTA. So that's been a great partnership. We did get AAA rating. That was pretty cool. We've been working on that for 5 years. That's gold standard. We hosted the speakers roundtable here. That's really an honor for the speaker to select the authority to talk transportation. Congressman Lipinski, I was invited to their roundtable in San Francisco. We did get a letter of support for our request for $20 million for a test facility in Contra Costa. The decision is in. There are 3 locations that were selected. We weren't one of them. None are in California. One is in Tampa, Florida. The other is New York City Department of Transportation. Polly Trottenberg's the Director of Transportation. She used to work at DOT. And the third is in Wyoming, and we're unsure what exactly is going on with connected vehicle in Wyoming, but there must be at least be a few connected vehicles. We have kicked off the integrated dynamic transit operation. It's in my report here. That's a very exciting research project that will help provide last mile linkage or first mile linkage for people taking transit of the future or making sure that bus waits for you if for whatever reason the BART train's a little bit late, which Director Keller tells me it never happens. I was invited to the League of Cities East Bay Division and talked about autonomous cars. Thank you, Janet, for inviting me there. Just a large number of questions. Lindsay actually went with me. My cell phone doesn't, the navigation unit doesn't work that well, so we were going in the wrong direction for a short period of time. My fault, but we did make it, and we're asked a lot of questions about autonomous driving, autonomous vehicles, and how it will affect the cities in the future. We're excited about that. Ross did mention that one of the issues is that people now are believing that if we build a 25-year plan, how do we make sure we can take advantage of future technology advancements if we don't have the resources in the right places to do that? And so if you're going to go out for another half cent, there may be a golden opportunity to provide some of those leveraging dollars for future technology that we don't have currently. And so we're excited about, at least other people are recognizing that as well. And we did get AAA. Did I mention that? Okay, sorry. I'm pretty excited about that. And thank you to the banking team. Thank you for putting all those presentations together. We went through it. We've been through it about 5 times now, but finally we got there. We did, Jack did a great job. Jack Hall, $200,000 in federal planning grant. We got an E76 in about 3 days, so through Caltrans. So Caltrans actually does great things every now and again. So can you please tell your father that I did mention Caltrans, and I did say that Caltrans is doing okay in the area of E76. Now, they did audit us, and it took 3 months, and we've been shorted about $42,000. I did text your dad tonight saying that we would like to have some of those dollars back again. So thank you, Daniel's son. And the last thing is Easy Mile. This is a company based out of France. We did a kind of a scan of all the technology available, and I did show Director Keller a picture of this future pod that's autonomous, and he tried to grab the picture out of my hand in Antioch, and I kept it. No, it was actually in Brentwood. It was in Brentwood. I kept a hold of it, and so now they're thinking about working with us very closely at Gomentum Station for future technology. So that's a great opportunity. So thank you for the time, and once again, we did get AAA, and we're pretty proud of that. Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Karen.
I'm going to take advantage of Director Keller being here. Is it my understanding that we are having a ribbon cutting on Friday the 25th at the Pittsburgh station?
It's October now.
I believe that's been postponed.
Again, to October.
It's been moved to October, I think.
Do we have a definite date?
I have not received the definite date.
Okay, I just will take it out, because you and
Yeah,
I
no,
had
yeah.
we
Take
had a
off
comment.
the 25th, and I'll be sure that staff alerts you as soon as we get the
Thank
date.
you.
Sorry about the confusion. We're working with Pittsburgh, and there has been a lot of confusion, but ultimately we'll figure it out.
Right. Randy?
I forgot to mention, Hercules is having a ribbon cutting this Saturday, and Chair Pierce is going to represent us. It's for the Bay Trail completion, so thank you for.
Another ABAG activity is funded by MTC partly, but oh well. Karen, did you have anything else?
Oh, I'm
Okay. In your packet is your calendar of upcoming events and also the notice about the Focus on the Future conference in the middle of November down in Newport Beach. It's always a really good program to go see, lots of good classes to take and lots of good connections to be made. So if you're even slightly inclined, I would encourage you to let Denise know so she can get you signed up as soon as possible. So with that, if there's nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you all.